Hi, welcome. Psilocybin is coming to healthcare, whether us in the healthcare workforce are ready for it or not. As we know, the FDA, research institutions, the federal government, through their executive order for deeper research and more funding into psychedelic research, are moving pretty fast, and including state governments, New Mexico being third in line to be creating the rules and regulations for psilocybin. They're moving pretty fast, and the workforce is lagging behind in training. This is an ongoing conversation. This is an educational series. I'm hoping I can have the bandwidth to do this every month with a different subject matters. Tonight's journey, we're going to look at 4 acts, if you will. We're going to look at the stakes, the data, the evidence. We're going to look at the story that I have that brought me to this work, and then the bridge between this gap in training and what we can do next to close that gap. The stakes. Right now, healthcare isn't ready for psychedelics. Clinicians are the last to know about psychedelics as research and regulations is moving forward. We're just not getting the training we need in higher education. Mental health crisis is untouched by current models. And what we're seeing is the rise in suicide, depression, and anxiety, which has been remaining pretty high locally, nationally, and globally. And this is despite decades of pharmaceutical first treatment. And I'm a Western trained physician, and I'm saying this. I'm a doctor of osteopathy, and I have my master's in public health. So I have a population health at the forefront, but I did this for years. I was giving pharmaceuticals first treatment. In the world of hospice that I practice right now, I still do that. I was an academic physician, a hospitalist academic physician at UNM for over a decade. And this is what I was taught, that these are the symptoms, this is how you treat it, these are the medications. And if you are questioning the medications, then your attending questions you. And this is not an attack on medicine. It's a structural gap. And the way medicine was really created, the journey of creation of medicine, that's a whole different topic, and the medical training. And we look at SSRIs and the standard protocols that we see today with SNRIs, with benzodiazepines. They help some patients at certain points. Let's say Xanax, for example, was created for panic attacks and reducing the severity of it in that moment. It wasn't meant to be given to patients over a long period of time. Patients are utilizing these medicines for decades. People are SSRIs not just for, let's say, 3 to 6 months for situational depression, and then they can come off of it. No, they're in fact on it for 3 decades, and they are so dependent on it, they're unable to come off of it, and they have such severe symptoms when they try to wean off. So we're managing symptoms without really getting to the source of the issue. And once, as a physician, I saw this through my own healing of my traumas as a child growing up in war and under a terrorist regime. I saw that all of these symptoms that we see as burnout is a symptom of a much deeper problem that is rooted in trauma, depression, anxiety, and so on. And so millions of patients are remaining in that suffering that the current medical model, the current medical industry, and I call it an industry because it is one. In 2015, the medical industry made over $3 trillion, and it surpassed the retail industry. That was 2015. Now it's probably $3.5 trillion to $4 trillion or so, which they've made it into a business. And what does a business do? It creates addictions, it creates dependency upon itself, and it takes away individual agency, because they want you to depend on them. And so what we're seeing is that the training gap we're talking about is a real deal, and it is documented. So Johns Hopkins did the study in 2024, and the study was published in Scientific Reports. 879 US healthcare professionals were surveyed, and they concluded that there is a genuine lack of formalized education in the current clinical training programs, even as interest in psychedelic-assisted therapy grows. So there's a lot more physicians, healthcare workers, trauma therapists, social workers, on and on, who are interested in learning about psychedelic-assisted therapy, and nurses included in this, but there's no training that really exists, or one that is in higher education platforms. And more than half of healthcare professionals surveyed expressed direct worry about the shortage of trained providers. As we all know it on this call, psychedelics are medicines that show ourselves to ourselves when we are doing them in the correct setting, and container, with preparation, with a guided session and integration. When we're missing any of those pieces, the adverse outcome numbers increase. And when we meet all those components, and also you have a caring practitioner, caring clinician with compassion, who you have a direct relationship with in the psychedelic realm, then we see those numbers go to zero. And I can speak of direct experience with that. The field is moving regardless of what we're doing in the healthcare industry. There's big time federal momentum. The executive order was signed for increasing research funding into psychedelics. The FDA has deemed both psilocybin and MDMA as breakthrough treatment designation for treatment-resistant depression and for PTSD in veterans. We are also looking at state frameworks that are advancing. Oregon was first, Colorado was next, and we are third in the country to pass the Medical Psilocybin Act, SB 219, which is now in active rulemaking process. And the target launch is end of 2026. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, and happy to answer questions. We are seeing a growing wave of clinicians and patients who are no longer willing to wait. I mean, I'm one of those people. I've been trauma healing for over a decade. It's been now about 13 years, and helping others, it's been 6 years. So the Conscious Physician was born in 2020, 6 years ago. And we'll get into that as well. Our workforce isn't ready. The need is undeniable. Treatment-resistant depression and depression, we have about 40 to 50 million Americans who are suffering from that. We have over 300 million people in the world globally who are suffering from anxiety, and on and on. And so the clinicians who get ahead of this curve, who do their own work first. And what do I mean by that? A psychedelic practitioner, we have to do our own work first, our own trauma engagement with our trauma, learning from our trauma, learning our own patterns. Why am I behaving the way I do? When things are sitting in the subconscious, it rules us, and we call it fate, as Carl Jung said. And so if I'm a policymaker, if I'm a physician, if I'm a nurse, if I'm a social worker, a spiritual counselor, my inner experience will absolutely come out in how I hold space for others, not only in healthcare, and exponentially more when I'm a facilitator in a psychedelic session. With psychedelics, individuals who take the voyager, who is on the journey, who has ingested the medicine, when we sit for them, they are in a consciousness expanded state. They are very vulnerable. The energies I, as their facilitator, bring into that space affect them, either adversely or in a healing way, or anything in between, of course. But you get the point. It matters how we show up. So if I've done my work first, and I'm not trying to gain my healing through their healing, which is very unethical to do, or let's say I'm a narcissist and I'm sitting for somebody in session who is super expanded and they're very vulnerable in that state, and I'm imparting my own egotistical belief system to them, That's unethical. And the ethics of all of this matters so much. We have to hold ourselves to the highest ethical standards and highest integrity when we enter these spaces with individuals who are willing to share that space with us. And it's a privilege to hold that space for them. And they've trusted us with that. And so, all to say that us clinicians, we are going to be frontliners. And in fact, the Medical Psilocybin Act of New Mexico states that there has to be a certifying clinician or a diagnostic clinician who first clears this patient with a diagnosis and also medical clearance before they can go to a facilitator. So we have to be educated on how to educate them, even if we are not the facilitator for them in that psychedelic session with psilocybin. We need to be able to educate them and also know the interactions, contraindications, indications with psilocybin. And so why does the current medical model fall short? Because it's a prescription only model and it treats surface symptoms only, while really the source of suffering is trauma, and oftentimes it's intergenerational trauma. And that's the part that stays completely untouched. And I can speak to my own experience as a physician. For a long time, I was just prescribing and I was not aware of this statement right here. And again, through my own healing and sitting with other people, really reaffirmed that for me, that once you get to the source, which is that trauma or intergenerational patterns of trauma, I couldn't unsee that. So at the hospital, I'd sit with patients at their bedside and I would get into the deep parts of their childhood trauma that was now translating into severe pain, severe pathologies of the body, metastatic cancers that they had been ignoring because of this self-sabotage pattern that was rooted in childhood trauma, because they were neglected, they were not loved, they were judged, on and on. And what I saw, gap of care that we have in the community of these individuals, even if I sat with them in the hospital and I listened to them, they unraveled their childhood story to me, I lacked the tools to share with them longitudinally to help them through these traumas. And I didn't even know who to send them to in the community once they discharged from the hospital, so that they could continue this treatment, this trauma therapy, and really self-discovery through that. And looking at the nervous system lens, we see that chronic trauma keeps the body locked in a fear loop, in a dysregulated state that shows up as anxiety, as depression, as addiction, and physical illness and pathologies of the body. In the medical model and training in medical school, we teach it as if the mind and the body are completely separate. And we know, especially having had psychedelic experiences, how far away from the truth that is, that we are an entire being. We are an energetic being with different frequencies of emotions, of cognition, the brain, and how it connects, the nervous system connects throughout the body, how we perceive the world and respond to the world or react to the world, all depends on this very dynamic interaction with our environments and with the relationships that we have with the other beings in our lives. And what if the suffering we're medicating isn't a chemical imbalance to suppress, but a message the body has been trying to deliver for years? Dr. van der Wolk, who wrote The Body Keeps Score, and that brought a lot of attention to how our bodies keep trauma, one, if they're not examined. So super grateful for his work. And what does the research actually shows? And where does policy stand right now? We've had a couple of major clinical trials. One was a double-blind controlled trial for major depression, Hump 005 study, if you guys want to look that one up. They were both published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they both used a similar dosage of synthetic form of psilocybin, which I have mixed feelings about, but they used synthetic psilocybin 25 milligrams, which is the equivalent of about 4 to 5 grams of dried mushrooms, depending on the species, and of course the dosage and all of that, and the species and the density of the psilocybin and the cap and the body, and all of those things matter. The whole mushroom has its own benefits. We know the whole mushroom does provide other medicines than psilocybin that will create an entourage effect. We don't know that about synthetic psilocybin, and a lot of this is in stages of infancy of understanding. And is synthetic mushroom addictive? The other one is in PTSD and trauma processing. This one is growing evidence with psilocybin specifically. We do know that MDMA has been designated as a breakthrough treatment for PTSD in the veteran population. That was a MAPS study that was conducted in 2018 and showed promises about 70% remission rate in the veteran population with PTSD. And a third one, which is a striking dementia case study, and it's worth sitting on its. This was a case study, one N of one. So for your researchers out there, it's a case study, and we have to take it as is and use it perhaps to do more research. This was just hot off the press. About a month ago in 2026, it was published in Frontiers of Neuroscience. An 80-year-old woman with advanced Alzheimer's dementia who was nonverbal for years started speaking in full sentences and recalled life details for nearly 4 hours after a high dose of psilocybin mushrooms. So I'm going to let you sit with that.
I did some napkin math on this. And she was given Enigma, which is a tidal wave isolation that grows as like a coral mutant. And I have an HPLC database of thousands of different species and cultivars potency. My rough math is that her dose was 70 to 95 milligrams of psilocybin equivalents. And that's massive, right? And it was very discomforting for her. But then the next day is when they saw the things. So it's really important in this conversation to distinguish the difference between challenging and adverse. That is a fascinating story, though. I cannot wait to see more research done on declining mental conditions.
That's a massive dose. I heard that was this her son that gave it to her?
Yeah, her son and family, everyone was kind of involved. And like the consent part of that is a little bit like, worth a good look.
She's been nonverbal for years. And of course, that is what we do, the ethical line, right? And we talk about this extensively in our end of life committee, where if a patient is not consentable, you don't give them psilocybin. And then the other question arises, well, if they're not consentable, then how come we're giving them morphine or olanzapine and all these antipsychotics that they may not want to be taking, but they are? Right.
Exactly.
Right. And it's the ethics go both ways. What are we doing with the medical model? And, I've witnessed so many patients in the hospital being held against their will because they were deemed non-decisional. And you're like, what am I doing? This is a huge gray area. But I specifically brought this on because of good conversation around it. That's a red line if somebody is not consentable with psychedelics. And it makes me question my medical practice as well for end of life and how we're making these decisions. So I will leave that for you to sit with. And so the researchers were very clear about this, that she had transient multi-domain functional improvement, not disease reversal or a cure. So we had to be very clear about that. And this was one case report. It is not proof. And it does raise a profound question that some capacity may persist dormant even in late stage neurodegeneration. and then briefly become accessible under the right conditions. There's some evidence that also shows when you have one large psychedelic dose, years later, we see structural changes in the brain. So who knows? It's to be seen. If we have researchers here on this call, please look into this for millions and millions of people who suffer from dementia and neurodegenerative diseases. This is huge. When we're talking about MAID, for example, right? Yeah, or when you are having a patient who comes to your office to be evaluated for early onset dementia, why aren't we having these conversations with them? And why not? When you are having the advanced directive conversation, hey, have you thought about psilocybin microdosing, macrodosing? Do you know the research? This is exactly why we're talking tonight about the gap of training. We don't have good training in our healthcare professionals that educates them so that they can educate their patients. So we can really take this far if the healthcare professional, that frontliner who is the first person who comes into contact with a patient, has that conversation with them. And how powerful is that? Thank you for the question and the suggestion. Yes, please.
I was just going to get to your mind body comment. I love that. And it's kind of intersecting with this exact concept where the dementia patient, you suddenly have done an intervention at the mind level, not the body level. And this person is clear and speaking the question of whether, even if they can't remember that, if that's going to go with their spirit or psyche, if they're going to die or if they're in hospice, what does that energetic transfer into the brain and the spirit do? But it reminds me, I didn't know my grandfather very long, but Western medicine, he had Parkinson's. And I remember one time when I was really young, he showed up and he started doing like dips and push-ups and all this movement, right? Like they'd given him anti-Parkinsonian body treatment. And then I saw him like a few months later, it wasn't working. His body wasn't working. But there's got to be a way to do this within the realm of the psyche. And for the hospice patient, for their mind, forget the body, and the same thing for the dementia patient. There's got to be some way that it can be measured and looked at beyond just, yeah, they spoke, but we don't know so much about what happens after that in their life, in their psyche, in their ingrained spirit.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And, it brings up the question of also the practitioner who cares and follows that patient longitudinally to have those compassionate inquiry questions. Because oftentimes, you have the big journey, especially what I've seen in the elderly population, when they do have a big journey, they don't talk about it. They're not as open to talking about like we are today. Our generation is a lot more, let's talk about this. Oh my gosh, I saw things I had no idea I had been carrying with myself, and we are willing to transmute. And I see that in the elderly, they have a much more difficult time opening up. And maybe these are the tools, right? These are the tools. And then you bring on practitioners who really care, who are trained to have conversation, even if they're not gonna give the medicine, if they're not gonna be the ones who are giving the psilocybin. I was at this assisted living facility in Albuquerque. I had a couple of patients there for hospice, and I was talking to one of their managers, and she was telling me how they brought in a psychiatrist for the patients who seemed very depressed and to talk to them. And the psychiatrist was like, I can't get through. Like, they will not talk to me about emotions or feelings or any of this, because they grew up in a generation, they didn't either believe in it, or it was the programming, right? We don't have emotions. You disconnect for so long, it becomes your norm. So my curiosity, I can't stop talking about this stuff because I find it fascinating. I tell her, what if someday we give a microdosing psilocybin as they're having their conversation with the psychiatrist? The resistance, the armor kind of drops. And so you have more access to the subconscious to have those conversations with them. And then on top of that, then you have the potential for neuroplasticity, neurogeneration. Thank you so much.
If you don't mind, I'll hijack this for a second.
Please hijack.
Yes. Okay, so Parkinson's, not Alzheimer's, is kind of what brought me into my deeper layers of research and everything, because my father is currently highly degrading.
Sorry to hear.
He'll never engage with this type of medicine, most likely. But what I've known in his treatment is Parkinson's responds to asking the brain to do a thing, not the response. Just continue asking. Move the arm up, move the arm down, move the arm up, move the arm down. And you're generating these like firing neurons. And those firing neurons are what creates like the resistance to the decline. And it is just that, it's resistance to the decline. Now, psilocybin, LSD, DMT, most HT2A receptor agonists are going to increase the capacity for your brain to flow those signals, right? And we can do other things to assist that. So the research that I'm very much looking forward to once we normalize psilocybin, get, all of this like documentation in place, doing the research on what microdosing can do to, instead of blow the cap off and follow the decline back towards default mode, to slowly pushing what the base of default mode is, right? So this Alzheimer's woman who took an insane dose of psilocybin and had some effects that people saw in multi-instrument and multi-domain like improvements, right? Like we see this happening, we know it happens, anecdotally we feel it, but like getting the science behind just slowly nudging plasticity through like metered, understood dosage. And it doesn't even have to be what people say. So that dose that we get where going into a therapy session and you're opening up, I would put that way above a microdose. That's in the meso range for me. It's like the amount that you can safely go to a museum, talk to your friends, connect with your brother. I have a dose that I do with my brother. We take some amount of the thing and talk on the phone and catch up. It's like heart connection, right? Way past the microdose, right? So understanding what these different dose ranges are is something that I really want to go into the educational model as we move into these regulated markets, so that we can build on that platform of understanding to develop the research to get even further. But like we're like so far away from what we're going to realize with this medicine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I love how you explained the going from the instead of like blowing off the cap, going back to the default mode network and trying to reconstruct yourself. And then there's a lot of fear back and forth with the microdosing. What I see, and the microdosing I talk about is micro. That's what I've done with my clients over the years, and I see great effectiveness for majority. So I'm really curious to hear from you about that too. But really great. Thank you so much, Jason.
I think it's interesting because, the Carhart-Harris MRI studies, the functional MRI, and, you've got to get to that 2.5 gram dose or higher. Default mode network goes offline and isn't this big burst. It's other parts that burst. Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. If, a study group could include functional MRI and stick the dementia patient in there and look at their baseline relevant to default mode network. I'm a little skeptical that a microdose is going to change things, because it's almost like their brain is completely different, but you'd probably have to get to a higher dose in order for it's like the neurolinguistic programming. It's like they're in a program based on the dementia and based on the neural wiring that they can't experience the reality of maybe how their brain used to work. So if you can change that default mode network situation, that's where it can go back to the old way. So yeah, nothing wrong with microdosing, but in certain populations, we may want to just get right into, look at their baseline functional MRI, see what's going on, and then see how it changes in certain doses. And, it really could accelerate some interesting information.
I
Yeah,
would
no,
love
for
to see
sure.
actual diagnostics for dosage protocols.
Yeah.
Like that would be incredible.
Incredible. And brain waves, let's do EEGs, let's like look at different dosages and see what happens. Let's see also the brainwave changes at different doses where people are conversational, just like you were sharing with your brother, how that heart connection happens, or at the lower doses. And I love that you bring this in with the structural changes. So the severity of the pathology matters, obviously, where we are with this disease process and what dosage we're using at that point. And I love this so much. Thank you for bringing all of this up. And this, if you guys are okay with it, give me a thumbs up if y'all are okay with us publishing this on my YouTube channel, and we're going to send it out to my email list, because this is how we change things. This is how researchers in our communities, get their radar up and like, okay, this is the spaces we need to get into and look at. Are you guys okay with that? If we just send this out to our people?
Personally, I am. I've got a dozen studies I'll give to anybody who wants to run them. Like,
awesome.
Go to
I love it, Gregory. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, and thank you, Jessica. And just to simplify, we have people here on the call who have a very deep understanding of these medicines, as you can see, and we have some people who are newer to this conversation. And just to level the playing field, let's talk about psilocybin itself, because we always care so much about education. You can then easily talk to other people about it in the community. So the mechanism of psilocybin is a compound that is found in over 200 species of mushrooms worldwide. It's been around since the beginning of Earth. And when ingested in the human body, we have methods that we can change it into psilocin outside of the human body. But for simplicity's sake, when a person ingests the whole mushrooms in the digestive tract, it gets digested, and then it's psilocin that interacts with the 5-HT2A receptors, which are a subtype of the serotonin receptors in the brain. And as research is coming along, we're also seeing psilocybin interacting with other serotonin receptors in the liver that we're looking at for potential sugar lowering effects and diabetic control, which is phenomenal. We also in the brain, because we've had a lot more research done looking at the brain specifically, there's increased neuroplasticity, there's increased neurogeneration, which is just fantastic. I studied neuroscience and behavioral biology at Emory University. And back then in 2000, we were talking about, only songbirds are able to have neuroplasticity when the seasons change and their song changes. And humans hit age 25. And after that, everything is downhill and the brain is atrophying. And it was so sad to hear that as a 21-year-old at the time, or 20-year-old. And so knowing that, and we're seeing this, there's a lot of research showing neuroplasticity that's increased. And this is what goes back to that unstuckness that can happen from these rigid patterns. Tying it back to the beginning of the conversation tonight, this is a potential mechanism for releasing the nervous system from that chronic dysregulated state that is causing the anxiety, that is causing the depression and PTSD and addiction and so on, and not just suppressing a symptom. We're actually getting to the root cause of this. Even in TBIs, we see this. There's more research coming out about, again, neurodegenerative diseases, nervous system regulation is. And so let's talk about where the policy stands right now in New Mexico with the Medical Psilocybin Act. We are the first state to establish a medical psilocybin program via legislature, not a ballot initiative, which is both Oregon and Colorado. We passed the Medical Psilocybin Act with very strong bipartisan support, and this happened in 2025. And Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham signed the bill in April of 2025. The bill says that we have until 2028 to finish the rulemaking process. The Department of Health decided to pull that forward to the end of 2026. And therefore, we are in this active rulemaking process that's been going on for some time now. And the 4 qualifying conditions that the bill set forth are treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, substance use disorder, and end-of-life care, which you can understand this covers a huge population of patients in New Mexico. and elsewhere as well. And on the national level, we are seeing growing state level movements in other states, New Jersey, and internationally. There is increased federal research funding and support. And so our direction is pretty clear, even if the timeline varies by state. And the honest gap is that none of this works without trained clinicians, specifically in New Mexico, because they just came out and said we're taking the medical part very seriously, and we have to have a diagnosing clinician or certified clinician who will confirm the diagnosis of the patient and give medical clearance. And that has huge ramifications, because once we open the doors, how many clinicians do we have in our state who have this type of training? I mean, I can't speak for myself, I can do that, but I have a pretty full panel of patients myself. Like I can take 10 patients going, into the new year and trying to enroll, I don't know how many patients who are really needing this type of treatment. And I'm going to tell you some about my story just because it really brings it home. These are my grandparents on my maternal side. You'll see my grandfather with the cane, and he was a physician too. He was an internal medicine physician in Iran, where I'm from, my country of origin. He practiced for over 40 years in Iran, and he passed away when I was 12 years old. And he's my inspiration for becoming a doctor. And why is that? It's because he cherished his relationship with his patients. He had this sacred, very human connection with his patients, and he was revered for that. He was also an amazing human. He knew over 2,000 lines of ancient Persian poetry. He was a philosopher. He was a space holder. He was a vocalist. So he never forgot his human part. To my dismay, like years later, coming to America, becoming a doctor here, and I'm just like, what is happening? We're running in a mill trying to churn out patients in 15 minutes. And I don't even have time to see my patient, but I have all the time to write them the prescription. And so that's why I do what I do today. This is my purpose in life that comes from a generation before me where I saw it done right. And I'm trying to do it right in America, in New Mexico specifically, because this is home now. This is the land where I did my healing. And you'll see on his side, my beautiful, fierce lioness of a grandmother. She was fire. Back in the day, she was super witty. She did not stop speaking when it was the right time to speak. She was a huge women's rights advocate, even during the oppressive regime, the terrorist regime that us Iranians are experiencing still to this day, who were put into power by Western forces in 79, and they're still in power after 50 years, and many wars that we've gone through, a lot of trauma in that country. And a lot of the work that I do today is for that country as well, and for the Iranians across the world. We have 8 million in the diaspora who fled the country for many reasons, and 92 million in the country of Iran who are living and reliving trauma every day. And so it is my dream to bring this work to people of the country of my origin. This is me. First year, first grade. I was born and raised in a very extremist terrorist regime in Iran that used Islam as a fear tactic and control. This is a world where children are not to be heard, and your emotional and physical needs were not only taught to be ignored, but they were taught to be sinful. And that's how I grew up. So there was a lot of survival. And we were severely censored and suppressed in all the ways. I really didn't speak up for many years. Even when I came to America, I didn't, because of this chronic oppression of voice. And it wasn't just by the regime, but also generations before who were carrying their own unprocessed trauma, and it was passed down as normal. This is just the cultural norm. Kids don't really say anything. You're not supposed to be talking. You're not supposed to be asking questions. And so the body learns what it's taught, and its fluency becomes in suppressing emotions in disconnecting from the body, because that fluency was what survival required. I remember being this age. This was actually the first day of first grade. I had never left home before this day to go to school. I didn't go to pre-K or kindergarten. I went straight to first grade. And here I was. I had to cover my hair because my hair is sinful and it turns on men. That's so messed up, right? And my body had to be covered, head to toe. You had to be covered because of the same reason. And, the girls are the sinful ones at age 6. How horrifying is that? And I went to school on this day, and I will never forget. There were hundreds of little girls just like me in the school courtyard standing in line. And the girl who was standing immediately in front of me had her hair out just a little bit, just like me, just a little sliver of hair out. And one of these morality police women came forward, whacked her upside the head, and pulled her out of the line and said, "I'm taking you upstairs to shave off your head." She's 6 years old. I'm 6 years old. This is the first day of school. Imagine the terror, right? The terror from day one of school. And this happened all the time. Corporal punishment was definitely part of what they did as their religious trauma, and they used this as a fear tactic and control methods. And they do this even to this day for 50 years now. And so I lived in a very safe, loving family, immediate family, who just held us very safe and loving. But when you're outside of that, in school and in society, it was a different story. And I never, ever, until I was in my 30s, did not recognize that I had all these traumas and all these fears I was holding on to from this age, and many more. And this is me as an intern at University of New Mexico. I was in residency. This is my daughter, who is 5 years old here, and she's now 18, going to college herself. This is one of our workrooms at UNM. And so my cost of success was that same suppression taught me how to become an extraordinarily successful doctor. I went through an unsuccessful marriage. I went through single motherhood during internal medicine residency, and I still was the first resident at UNM history to win Best Resident of the Year 3 years running. And then I became chief resident, the first DO in the history of UNM to become a chief resident at the university. Then I went on to become one of the first policymakers as a DO at University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center, overseeing over 2,700 physicians for documentation education. And we ran the most successful educational campaign in the history of New Mexico. And so the pathological perfectionism and people pleasing made me one of the most celebrated physicians in my program. And every accolade was built on betraying what I actually needed, which half the time was just rest and sleep. And I completely pushed through because that was what you do. And so, I didn't listen to my intuition for so long. And she kept talking to me. She kept saying, "Hey, go the route of education," because that's my love. And that's why I have a training program, obviously. Now I listen. I've been listening for some time now, but it kept taking me to, hey, listen, like, education is the way. Go into medical school education. Instead, I went the route of educating, but educating on something I didn't care about, on documentation, coding, and billing. I didn't care about that. The system cared about that. And they made a ton of money off my back and off my team's back that I saw nothing of. But all of these self-betrayals, they were all based in my trauma patterns. And this is me in 2018. This is me on this side on the right at Burning Man, with two of my soul tribe mates and my fiance at the time, who took the picture, my husband, walking towards the temple, which actually they burned. I believe that night they burned it. And you can put a picture of your loved one, which I took my grandfather's picture to the temple to let him go out of my trauma pattern, which was really beautiful in my healing journey. But this was the day after an incredibly huge storm that came through the desert. And I had taken LSD that night, and it took me to places I never imagined I would go. And before going into this journey, I had been in such a dark place. It was kind of in between this place of, hold on one second, I have to show you this picture. This place of being in a resident, super celebrated, then an attending. And then as soon as I entered becoming an attending, those 2 years were the darkest years of my life, where I had such severe depression and I had suicidal ideation and thought. And it was this little girl, my little daughter, who was my light coming out saying, hey, you can't leave this life. You can't leave me behind with my biologic. And that was my inner voice that kept saying, no, you need to figure this out. You can't just succumb to the darkness. But I couldn't see the light. It was so dark for so long that I really did. There were so many days I'd wake up and say, you know what? I wish I didn't. And it was my little girl who kept me going, and the thoughts of, her being around and me being around and guiding her through life. So I'm forever grateful. And children are my muses in doing this work. Going into this journey, going to the desert, back then, no one talked about psychedelics. No one talked about their experiences. No one talked about intention setting. At least, the people I was around didn't. Even though they were psychedelic experienced, they didn't talk about it. This was not in the conversations at all. And so when I went through my journey, before going in, something internally told me, I have to figure this out. I have to come out of this darkness. I have to find myself. And I put that intention out to the desert wholeheartedly with my entire being. I even called this lady who was called a love therapist. And I was like, I need help. I need help and I don't know what to do. And she helped me with connecting with my heart the day before, setting the intention. And that really set me on this journey of finding myself. Now, talking about adverse or bad trips or challenging experiences, my teammates called it, "Oh, you had a bad trip." And I was so offended. And I was so offended that it took me back to that place of suppressing my voice again and self-censoring, because I felt that no one's going to understand me. And they didn't. And I understand why, because they weren't trained. A couple of them were physicians, but they didn't understand what I just went through. I didn't understand what I just went through. I couldn't verbalize. And a big part of it was the years of censorship. But to let you all know is that I separated myself from the group, because that's exactly what I needed. Not that I did it consciously, it just happened because the storm came and we were on bikes and I got separated. All of a sudden I didn't have a body. I didn't know if I was walking, running, on my bike, off my bike. I had no idea. One of our Soul Tribe members standing right here, he actually came and got me off the bike because he saw me go. And then we all got separated. It was the two of us, and the rest of the group stayed together, fortunately. And it's scary. He stayed with me the whole time. He wanted to take me back. I peeled him off of myself. I was like, nope, I need this. And I, in fact, took my goggles off. I took my headband off. I was like, I need to feel this storm. I need to feel this. We were in the eye of the storm, and I saw all of my childhood, all my fears come up as these smaller dust storms, tornadoes going up, but they were no longer a part of me. I was not holding on to them anymore. They were out here, and I was seeing them as these illusions that were created by forces outside of me. And by the end of this journey, which I don't know how long it took, I could have told you, it was an hour. I could have told you it was 12 hours. I don't know how long it was, but I came out and so much more came out, so much more. But that was one of the biggest ones. And it took me, you guys, 2 years to come through this journey and understand myself again. And this is how the conscious physician method was born. It was this journey. that was that pivotal moment. And before this journey, I had had many psychedelic experiences with many other medicines, but none of them in this way of this deep desire and want and commitment to finding myself again, because I had never been in such a dark place in my life. And this was the most meaningful moment and most pivotal moment in my life to this day, where I felt I was really paralyzed for years, and it felt like I was learning how to walk again. And the conscious physician method were these jewels that kept dropping into my consciousness. Do this, like fractals of truth that were shown to me. I used to be an avid meditator since age 12. I was on a spiritual path and I had let that go. And the questions kept coming up, why? And the answers were because I was people pleasing, because it was not approved by others as a teenager for me to meditate out in the open or be myself, authentically myself. And so meditation came back to me and I was like, okay, I'm listening. I'm going to sit and I'm going to meditate. I had been meditating for an hour and a half as an 18-year-old in my in my dorm room or at home, closed doors. But as a 30-something-year-old, I got an app, Headspace, and little by little, I got back into it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is what my soul needs. And it felt right. And I started listening to my intuition again. And then I started doing research behind it. I was like, well, if I'm feeling so different using meditation, there must be some physiological change. There was a lot of crazy things that happened during COVID, but one of the things that happened was that we started looking within a lot more. And I am grateful for that. That was a hugely challenging experience, very similar to a psychedelic challenging experience for everybody globally. But a lot of us turned within, and then a lot of research came out during that time about meditation, mindfulness, all of that. So then I started incorporating that. I'm like, no, we gotta do this. And so my husband, also being a VA physician, and we are both scientists, and we started just doing it experientially. My husband was a lot more resistant to it, but gave it a good old try for 6 months to a year. And he was like, oh my gosh, I see a huge change in myself. And so then we looked at the research together. We're like, of course this works. And step by step, we looked into nutrition and how big nutrition industry is telling us to be eating all the carbs, all this addictive stuff, all this toxins, to be chronically ill, so that we are dependent on this medical industrial complex where the pharmaceuticals, the insurance companies, everybody's hand is in each other's pockets. And so really opening our minds to so much of what we had been taught in medical school and in our residency training, and really unraveling and untangling all of it and seeing it for ourselves through scientific minds, and making that decision with full agency and seeing, oh my gosh, like this is how you eat. And it's been oppressed and it's been suppressed by big industry for all of these reasons, on and on. And this is how the conscious physician method was born. We have 20 conscious life practices for preparation and integration. We have trained over 300 healthcare professionals across the nation. This is not just in New Mexico. We've done this across the nation. Right now, we're in the midst of our live cohort, the originators, who are going through the 9-month live program, which may be not offered for at least a few more years, unless the rules and regulations make it easy for us to continue offering it. Though we do have the online course, which I'm going to talk about in a minute with you guys. In 2022, we trained over 20 local therapists in Albuquerque with incredible results, not only for themselves, for the therapists themselves, but for community that they're serving. Come fall of 2025, because the bill was already signed and we had been doing this work for many years by that point, 5 years, not really talking about it out loud, but people kept finding us through word of mouth, through the podcasts that I have, and people wanted different ways of healing. And I also wrote a book That was a best-selling book on Amazon that was published a few years ago. And people started finding us, and this is how this all developed. And so in the fall of 2025, we decided to open up the Conscious Physicians Psychedelics Academy to meet the training need that was created not by just SB 219, the Medical Psilocybin Act, but seeing how other states are coming along and seeing what they're lacking, in the state of Colorado and Oregon, how these rulemaking processes are just bottlenecking everything and really creating suppression of the medicine. And in California, seeing that it was a group of medical doctors who vetoed the bill from going through their state government. We need to educate more than anything. Even if we're not holding space, if we're not even facilitating, we need to educate first and foremost. And so right now we are in the process of deciding whether we're going to submit CPPA live for certification pathway for New Mexico or not, depending on how the rules and regulations are implemented. If they're making it super difficult, we're not super interested. If they're making it, more flowy and easier to do this work, then yeah, we might be game to move forward with it. Either way, we have an evergreen online course that we have created as a bridge to this gap, because come December 2026, let's say we have more than 10 patients who are interested in seeking this modality of healing as is set forth by the act. We have two clinicians who could certify or help people get to facilitators who might be certified by the state by that point. But that's a huge bottleneck. I feel a big responsibility. I was a big part of getting the Medical Psilocybin Act through the governor's desk in 2025. And I feel a big responsibility for us to do this right. So we're doing this big campaign of educating clinicians. And who am I talking about? Everybody on this call is a clinician. Researchers, clinicians, therapists, we're talking about social workers. And then if we have practitioners who want to become certified, and then there's pathways for them for the preparation and integration. And then the facilitation is going to be its own pathway based on the rules and regulations that the state of New Mexico decides to put forth.
I mean, the first question is pretty straightforward, but the clinicians thing is we need to reach out to people who are operating in the clinical space. And there's a percentage of those who may have been to Burning Man or had some other experience that opened their heart and their mind to the reality that reality isn't what we think it is. But that's, a small percentage of the population. And I'm not trying to homogenize everybody into this cult of psychedelics, but we need how do we normalize this across
Thank you for that question. As we have it right now, in a couple of days we're going to see more clarification on some of the rules that were set forth a couple of weeks ago. But one of their requirements for the diagnosing clinician is 8 hours of continuing medical education for the diagnosing clinician. And so that could be an entry pathway for those who are interested, but yet not completely open to the space, where we're just educating them on psilocybin. We're also educating them on the 4 diagnoses as set forth by the bill that they should know about. And I think that's a start. And then they can go into other pathways moving forward, which is what we're providing for preparation. If we don't permit in New Mexico, where you're operating in the physical space, we can certify people in, let's say, coaching for preparation and integration any day, right? And educate people with psilocybin or any psychedelic any day. That's freedom of speech. We don't need to be certified for that. If you are wanting to sit as a facilitator, that is to be determined. And I've had conversations with the DOH very recently about how that's going to look like. For the cohort that's going through my program right now with the Conscious Physician Psychedelics Academy, They have gone through their didactics that is super comprehensive already, which is now turned into an evergreen online course that we are utilizing to bridge that educational gap and also the gap of preparation and integration for clinicians. The facilitation portion of it, which we're talking about 40 experientials or 40 hours, I don't know. They're still trying to
like it's all in the recommendation phase. But yeah,
right, exactly.
I think we're sitting in that range.
Right. And so two things have been discussed. One, waiting for New Mexico to legalize a practicum setting in New Mexico. Two, which is easier to obtain, I don't have a lot of information about it yet, is individuals who've gone through the program, they can go to Colorado or Oregon at a facility that they're doing this already, and they can get their hours there. Reciprocity piece will count.
Yeah, in the brief period at the beginning. So
yes.
Is your academy doing practicums or other types of like are you taking people to a place where it is legally defensible and doing the thing? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that if you're going to serve this type of medicine, it's best that you experience the medicine. We had our experiential in Colorado under the personal use law and gifting. We are not medicine touching and working with others who are doing this work.
Will the CPPA be able to, if the context becomes correct, like will this organization be able to provide CEs?
I do already. Yeah.
Okay, cool. CE credits available today, right? So this is like the thing that needs to happen immediately. As soon as these rules go through in September, these programs need to be in place so that people can start going through these, even if it's a 16-hour credit weekend, right? Yeah. Go through that once the law goes through and be ready, because there's a workforce that needs to exist, right? Like I'm just not trying to set you up for like, I'm going to solve this problem, but it's like, I really want to hear that people are in place trying to sort these, like this need. This is
it. This is literally the piece of the puzzle that I'm bringing to the table, Gregory. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing it up.
Bring it.
100%. I'm all about it. I've already talked to the DOH about it because this is a huge deal. So we open up the doors and the bottleneck is like this and no one can get through. Yes, absolutely. For live course right now, we have CMEs and CEUs. For the online course that I'm about to show you all, we have CEUs. CMEs take some time, but for the 8 hours that the rules are requiring that I'm hearing about, we are seeking CMEs. And CEUs, that's not going to be that difficult for us because we already have that relationship with UNM School of Medicine. We need this big time. The online course is live right now. It has been live for about a month now. We are running our next cohort with the online course because we're seeing that we absolutely need this. And it's a 15-week physician-led trauma-informed psychedelics preparation and integration program. Again, this is what I'm bringing to nursing homes, to staff, to higher education facilities to get the workforce up to speed. You learn about preparation, safety, ethics, integration, and it begins with your own healing. You can't ethically guide anyone else if you haven't walked through that process yourself. And I'm not just talking about with medicine. I'm talking about the healing journey that happens with the 20 conscious life practices. We have 20 different tools that we utilize. Our members have shared with us just using the conscious life practices. It's wild how your life changes. I'm not a believer in, well, here's the technology, go off and figure it out. I am about grounding it down into the roots with community. As you all know, we have many different community events for exactly that reason. Is it a lot of work on my back? 110%. Is it worth it? 110%, because it is in these weekly coaching sessions that magic happens. And this is where vulnerable shares regulators come in, and this is so much healing. And we go through, hey, what conscious life practices are you using? How are you using it? And what's coming up for you? This is phenomenal what happens here. And it is a certification pathway for preparation and integration coaching, just with the online course that's 15 weeks long. We made it this short just because of this need that we have. And this is not the end of it. It's a pathway. If you decide, hey, I want to become also a facilitator with a macrodose journey, then we are formulating those pathways as things become legal, as you heard. This is some of the things that people who are in the live cohort, these are professionals. These are licensed professionals. We have a group of people from Red Willow Hospice in our group, who the medical director, we have the founder, we have nurses, we have NPs, PAs, we have addiction medicine specialists, and we have so many amazing people. We have trauma therapists, we have social workers, we have people from outside of the state. We have researchers from Indiana that are part of this cohort, and they're saying that it's changed so many aspects of my life, that both the retreat and the preparation course has impacted, beginning with the preparation and CLPs. And they're talking about not even taking medicine, you guys. This is 3 months of preparation and utilizing conscious life practices in community. This alone helped me so much in controlling my stress and anxiety levels as I'm going through some of the most difficult times of my life right now. Meditation, spending time in sunlight, hydration, practicing gratitude, and creating heartfelt connections were some of many practices I wasn't already doing. And this is soul work. When we're doing this work, especially in community, in those small group sessions, it changes lives. And we educate about medicine. And if you say that you want to utilize medicine, we teach you about it, how to microdose. This is collective work. Nothing can happen in this realm by yourself. We need each other. Some of the things people talked about, their professional development, and this is really the meat of it, right? This is some purpose work. When you do your work internally, and it really speaks to how you show up to your community of patients, clients, family members, and it showed that participants gain practical application skills, increased confidence in decision making, deeper understanding of ethical medicine work, allowing them to better support others in uncovering their own truths. Personal healing and growth. For them, the program provided a transformative space for self-exploration, recentering, emotional regulation, helping individuals address life challenges, release past conditioning, and embrace a path of personal alignment. Under the category of community and connection, the experience served as a vital foundation for learning and healing, emphasizing that meaningful recovery occurs through shared vulnerability and authentic connection rather than in isolation. And there's a balanced well-being. Integration of conscious life practices and the retreat environment reminded practitioners of the importance of self-care, joy, and presence, shifting their perspective from role of martyrdom to one of grounded, compassionate service. And so the offer is $3,333, and there's flexible payment plans that are available to individuals who can't pay that upfront. We are applying for CME. You already have CEUs. Some practices pay at least partially or fully for the program. This cart closes July 24th for good reason. We are under pressure from the policy, making sure that we have at least a few practitioners sign up and they stick with it, with the deadline that we give to the DOH to have enough people come through for December 2026 to be ready to at least take on a certain patient load to clear them for access to this, with facilitators in the community, again, collaboration with facilitators who are already certified. I didn't build CPPA to build a business. I built it because I needed it, and it did not exist. There were no guides at the time that I could talk to vulnerably and openly about my experiences and the challenges that I went through. And it was really, really difficult. And it took me 2 years to come through that. I am deeply in gratitude for all of those challenges, including my childhood and all those traumas and the patterns of trauma that I carried with me, because it takes me to this point of being able to share this as service to our beautiful New Mexico. Whether the state opens up the certification path or it doesn't, our work doesn't stop here. We are translating the online course to Farsi and to 5 other languages. We're in the process of working on this to do this work globally. And in fact, we have the only hospice in India, in the country of India, has reached out to get their board of trustees educated about this. This work is a movement for humanity. We need better. We can't keep living in these wars and intergenerational trauma that is not examined. We are really doing a disservice to ourselves and to the next generations if we continue these patterns. I really get concerned for my kids, our 18-year-old daughter who's about to go to college, our son who's 5.5, and all these wars, all this trauma that is creating more trauma, and then world leaders who are super traumatized themselves, who are creating all these issues for humanity. We have a chance to change that trajectory. And so if you really feel this in your body, what you heard tonight in this webinar, first of all, thank you for showing up and being here. Thank you for the rich conversation and discussion. Reach out or apply online, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.